The battlefield was a cacophony of chaos, a symphony of destruction that seemed to stretch endlessly across the crimson-streaked landscape. The air hung heavy with the acrid stench of burning metal and scorched earth, mingling with a metallic tang of blood, both human and alien. The ground beneath Captain Elena Vega's boots was littered with the remnants of war, shattered exoskeletons, twisted fragments of advanced weaponry, and the lifeless bodies of comrades who had fought valiantly but ultimately fallen. Elena moved with precision, her every step calculated despite the turmoil around her. Her armored suit bore the scars of countless battles, its once pristine surface now marred by scorch marks and dents. She had trained for this moment her entire life, honing her skills as a soldier in humanity's desperate struggle against the alien invaders. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the reality of facing these creatures, not just as enemies, but as beings driven by motives she could scarcely comprehend. The aliens, known only as the Veilith, were unlike anything Earth had ever encountered. Towering over humans, their sleek, insectoid forms gleamed with an iridescent sheen under the dim light of the planet's twin suns. Their elongated limbs ended in razor-sharp claws, and their multifaceted eyes reflected intelligence far beyond mere instinct. They communicated through haunting, melodic clicks and hums that resonated deep within the chest, evoking both awe and terror. To humanity, they were monsters, a relentless tide bent on conquest and domination. But to Elena, standing amidst the carnage, they were something more complex, something unknowable. Her squad had been tasked with breaching the heart of the Veilith stronghold, a sprawling hive-like structure that pulsed with eerie bioluminescence. It was said to house their queen, the source of their collective will and power. If they succeeded in neutralizing her, it might cripple the Veilith forces long enough for humanity to regroup. The mission was clear: no survivors, no mercy. This was not just about victory, it was about survival. As Elena pressed forward, her rifle raised and her breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, she couldn't shake the weight of what lay ahead. Every step brought her closer to the nexus of this conflict, where decisions made in the heat of battle would ripple outward, shaping the fate of two species locked in an existential struggle. And though she had vowed to carry out her orders without hesitation, a part of her, a quiet, insistent voice buried beneath layers of duty and discipline, wondered if there was another way. The corridor before her narrowed, its walls slick with some viscous substance that glistened faintly in the low light. The air grew warmer, heavier, as if the very atmosphere conspired to slow her advance. Behind her, the rest of her team followed in tense silence, each member acutely aware of the stakes. Ahead, the faint hum of alien activity grew louder, vibrating through the soles of her boots and into her bones. She tightened her grip on her weapon, steeling herself for what awaited beyond the next turn. When the final barrier fell, Elena found herself face to face with the being at the center of it all, the Veilith Queen. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, while tendrils of glowing filaments cascaded down like luminous vines. At its core stood the Queen, her form both majestic and terrifying. Unlike her warriors, she radiated an otherworldly elegance, her exoskeleton shimmering with hues that shifted like liquid rainbows. Her body was larger, more intricate, adorned with delicate spines and flowing appendages that seemed almost organic in their movement. She loomed above Elena, yet there was no aggression in her posture, only a profound stillness, as if she were waiting. Elena froze, her finger hovering over the trigger of her rifle. Orders screamed in her mind: eliminate the threat, end the war. But something held her back. Perhaps it was the way the Queen regarded her, not with hostility, but with an intensity that felt almost curious. Or perhaps it was the realization that this creature, for all her alien nature, was not merely a monster. She was alive, sentient, a being capable of thought and emotion. Elena's training told her to see the enemy. Her humanity saw something else entirely. The Queen tilted her head slightly, her multifaceted eyes locking onto Elena's. A low, resonant hum filled the chamber, reverberating through the air and into Elena's chest. It wasn't a sound of anger or defiance. It was softer, almost melodic, carrying an undertone of sorrow. For a fleeting moment, Elena wondered if the Queen understood her predicament, if she sensed the internal war raging within the human soldier who stood before her. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavy with unspoken questions. Could mercy exist in the context of war? Was it possible to extend compassion to an adversary without betraying one's own people? Elena's heart pounded as she wrestled with these thoughts, her resolve wavering under the weight of uncertainty. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lowered her weapon. The decision came not from logic but from instinct, a gut-deep certainty that killing this creature would be wrong. Not because it would end the conflict, but because it would diminish something vital within herself. As the rifle slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor, the queen responded with a subtle shift in posture. Her spines relaxed, and the hum softened further, taking on a tone that felt almost grateful. Elena took a cautious step forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. Around her, the chamber seemed to hold its breath, the glowing filaments dimming slightly as if responding to the tension between the two beings. The queen extended one of her slender appendages, its tip brushing lightly against Elena's armored glove. The touch sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of connection, an acknowledgement of shared existence in a universe vast and indifferent. For the first time since the war began, Elena allowed herself to truly see the Vailith not as conquerors or destroyers, but as a civilization fighting for survival, much like humanity itself. In that moment, she realized that the choice before her was not just about sparing a life, it was about forging a bridge where none had existed before. Whether it would lead to understanding or catastrophe remained to be seen, but one thing was certain, the course of history now rested in her trembling hands. In the days that followed, Elena found herself navigating uncharted territory, both literally and emotionally. The Vailith Queen, whose name translated roughly to Sovereign Weaver, had led her deeper into the labyrinthine hive, revealing chambers and corridors that defied human comprehension. Bioluminescent flora pulsed rhythmically along the walls, casting an ethereal glow that seemed alive with purpose. Strange, insectoid drones flitted silently overhead, their movements synchronized as if guided by an unseen conductor. Yet it was the queen herself who commanded Elena's attention, her presence both mesmerizing and unsettling. Through gestures, sounds, and fragments of visual communication projected onto translucent membranes within the hive, Sovereign Weaver began to share glimpses of her world. Elena learned that the Vailith were not invaders in the traditional sense. They were refugees, fleeing a dying star system whose collapse had rendered their homeworld uninhabitable. Their arrival on this planet, rich with resources and teeming with potential, had been born of desperation rather than malice. Humanity's resistance, though understandable, had been perceived as an act of hostility, escalating tensions until war became inevitable. Sovereign Weaver's revelations struck Elena like a thunderclap. She had always believed the Vailith to be ruthless conquerors, devoid of empathy or reason. To discover that their actions stemmed from survival instincts mirrored those of her own species forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of conflict. Were humans any different when faced with extinction? Had they not also waged wars over land, water, and sustenance throughout history? The parallels gnawed at her conscience, complicating her already fragile sense of duty. Yet alongside guilt came curiosity, and a growing admiration for the queen. Sovereign Weaver embodied resilience and wisdom, qualities Elena recognized in herself and her fellow soldiers. Despite their vastly different forms, they shared a common drive, the will to protect their people at all costs. This realization softened the edges of Elena's initial apprehension, allowing her to engage more openly with the alien leader. Slowly, tentatively, trust began to take root between them. Their interactions evolved into something neither could have anticipated. Sovereign Weaver introduced Elena to rituals and practices unique to the Vailith culture, ceremonies of renewal, harmonization, and even mourning. One such ritual involved immersing oneself in pools of nutrient-rich fluid that glowed softly with healing properties. As Elena hesitantly joined the queen in one of these sacred baths, she felt an unexpected warmth seep into her weary muscles, easing the physical toll of years spent fighting. More profoundly, she experienced a sensation akin to clarity, as though the liquid carried whispers of ancient knowledge meant to soothe the soul. These moments of connection transcended language barriers, creating bonds forged in mutual vulnerability. Elena found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing stories of Earth, her family, and the dreams she'd abandoned when war consumed her life. In return, Sovereign Weaver offered insights into the intricacies of Vailith society, painting vivid pictures of their art, music, and communal living structures. Through these exchanges, Elena began to see the queen not as an adversary or even a diplomat, but as a kindred spirit burdened by responsibilities too great for one individual to bear alone. However, the path to understanding was fraught with challenges. News of Elena's actions spread quickly among her fellow soldiers, sparking outrage and disbelief. Some accused her of betrayal, claiming her mercy toward the Queen undermined humanity's efforts to reclaim their planet. Others viewed her with suspicion, questioning whether prolonged exposure to the Valeth hive had somehow altered her judgment, or worse, corrupted her loyalty. Even those who respected her courage struggled to reconcile her choices with the brutal realities of war. Back at the human encampment, tensions simmered just below the surface. Commanders demanded answers, pressing Elena for details about the Queen's intentions and the feasibility of negotiating peace. While some leaders saw an opportunity to end the bloodshed, others dismissed the idea as naive, arguing that diplomacy with the Valeth was tantamount to surrender. Caught between opposing factions, Elena became a lightning rod for debate, her every word scrutinized and dissected. Amidst the chaos, Elena received an invitation from Sovereign Weaver to participate in a private ceremony deep within the hive. Though wary of leaving her comrades during such a volatile time, she accepted, sensing the importance of maintaining the fragile bond they had built. What awaited her in the hidden chamber surpassed anything she could have imagined. The space was adorned with crystalline formations that refracted light into dazzling patterns, creating an ambience of serene beauty. At its center stood Sovereign Weaver, surrounded by a circle of attendants who emitted soft, melodic tones that resonated through the air. As Elena approached, the Queen extended a delicate appendage, inviting her to join the circle. Hesitant yet trusting, Elena stepped forward, allowing herself to be enveloped by the harmonious vibrations. The experience was unlike anything she had ever known, a fusion of sensory stimuli that transcended physical touch. Waves of pleasure coursed through her body, accompanied by flashes of imagery that seemed drawn from both her memories and the collective consciousness of the Valeth. She saw visions of distant stars, verdant landscapes, and faces both familiar and foreign, each imbued with emotions so raw and vivid they brought tears to her eyes. When the ceremony concluded, Elena emerged transformed, not physically, but spiritually. The encounter left her with a profound sense of unity, as though she had glimpsed the interconnectedness of all life. Yet it also awakened desires she hadn't known existed, stirring feelings of longing and intimacy that blurred the boundaries between species. Sovereign Weaver's gaze, filled with quiet understanding, suggested that she too had been affected by the exchange. Returning to the human camp proved difficult. The stark contrast between the sterile military environment and the lush, pulsating vitality of the hive weighed heavily on Elena. Her comrades noticed the change in her demeanor, interpreting it as either strength or weakness depending on their perspective. Some admired her newfound resolve, seeing it as evidence of her unwavering commitment to forging peace. Others viewed her altered state with unease, whispering of brainwashing or manipulation. Despite the mounting pressure, Elena refused to abandon her mission. She knew the road ahead would be perilous, fraught with obstacles that tested not only her courage but her faith in the possibility of coexistence. Yet as she gazed skyward at the twin suns setting over the scarred horizon, she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that perhaps, against all odds, humanity and the Valeth could find a way to share this world without destroying each other. The days stretched into weeks, and Elena found herself caught in an emotional maelstrom that threatened to unravel everything she thought she understood about loyalty, identity, and purpose. Back at the human encampment, whispers turned into shouts, debates escalated into arguments, and the fragile coalition holding humanity's forces together began to fracture. Commanders who once trusted her judgment now questioned her motives, accusing her of prioritizing her connection with Sovereign Weaver over the welfare of her own people. Soldiers who had once looked up to her as a leader now regarded her with wary eyes, unsure whether she was still one of them. Elena bore the weight of their scrutiny silently, retreating into herself as the accusations mounted. Nights were the hardest. Alone in her quarters, she replayed every decision, every interaction with Sovereign Weaver, searching for flaws in her reasoning. Had she been reckless, naive, selfish? The doubts gnawed at her, feeding off the isolation that came with being the sole bridge between two warring species. Yet, even as her confidence faltered, she couldn't deny the truth of what she had witnessed within the hive, the beauty, the complexity, the undeniable sentience of the Valeth. To dismiss them as mere monsters would be to betray not only her principles but the fragile hope of peace itself. Her visits to the hive became both a refuge and a crucible. Each time she returned, Sovereign Weaver greeted her with a mixture of patience and quiet concern. The Queen seemed to sense the turmoil brewing within Elena, offering comfort through gestures that transcended words. Once, during a particularly fraught visit, Sovereign Weaver led her to a secluded alcove where bioluminescent blossoms swayed gently in the air currents. There, the queen produced a series of melodic hums that resonated deeply within Elena, calming her racing thoughts and grounding her in the present moment. It was in these moments of connection that Elena felt most alive, most whole. But they also heightened her awareness of the chasm widening between her and her own kind. Tensions reached a breaking point when a rogue faction of human soldiers launched an unauthorized attack on the outskirts of the hive. The strike was swift and brutal, targeting supply lines and peripheral defenses in an attempt to weaken the Veilith's infrastructure. News of the assault reached Elena just as she was preparing to leave the hive after another meeting with Sovereign Weaver. The queen's reaction was measured but unmistakably pained. Her spines quivered slightly, and the usual harmony of her hums fractured into discordant notes. For the first time, Elena saw anger flicker across the queen's multifaceted eyes. Not rage, but a deep, sorrowful fury born of betrayal. "You must stop this," Elena pleaded later that evening, addressing the council of human commanders gathered in the war room. Her voice trembled with urgency, but her words fell on deaf ears. Some argued that the attack was justified, a necessary measure to regain the upper hand. Others dismissed her warnings, claiming the Veilith would retaliate regardless of her efforts to mediate. Frustration boiled over as Elena slammed her fist onto the table, demanding they listen. "If we keep escalating, there won't be anything left to fight for," she shouted, her voice cracking under the strain. Silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of holographic maps projecting troop movements across the walls. Exhausted and defeated, Elena retreated to the edge of the encampment, seeking solace in the cool night air. The stars above seemed impossibly distant, their light cold and indifferent. She thought of Sovereign Weaver, alone in her hive, grappling with the same fears and uncertainties that plagued her. Would the queen see her as complicit in the attack? Could their fragile bond withstand the weight of mistrust and violence? Her musings were interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Marcus Hale, a close friend and former comrade in arms. He approached cautiously, his expression torn between sympathy and reproach. "Elena," he began, his voice low and measured, "you're losing us. You're losing yourself." His words cut deeper than any accusation, striking at the heart of her greatest fear. She wanted to argue, to defend her choices, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't anger she saw there, it was grief. Grief for the woman she used to be, the soldier who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with him without hesitation. "I don't know what to do anymore," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the horizon where the twin suns would rise in a few hours. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm but gentle. "Then let us help you," he said simply. "But you have to choose a side, Elena. You can't keep straddling the line." The weight of his words settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Choose a side. The phrase echoed in her mind, taunting her with its simplicity. How could she choose when both sides carried pieces of her heart? The humans were her people, bound to her by blood, history, and shared suffering. The Veilith, though alien in form, had shown her kindness, understanding, and a vision of coexistence that felt achingly beautiful. To pick one was to reject the other, and the thought of severing either connection filled her with despair. That night, sleep eluded her. Instead, she wandered the perimeter of the encampment, her thoughts spiraling into darker and darker places. She imagined the worst-case scenarios: a full-scale retaliation from the Veilith, wiping out the human forces, a coup within her own ranks, branding her a traitor and stripping her of command, or worse, the complete collapse of negotiations, plunging both species back into endless cycles of bloodshed. Each possibility felt like a blade twisting in her chest, leaving her breathless and hollow. And yet, amid the chaos of her mind, a small, stubborn spark of determination refused to die. She thought of Sovereign Weaver's quiet strength, her unwavering belief in the possibility of peace despite centuries of conflict. She remembered the warmth of the hive, the melodies that resonated through her soul, and the fleeting moments of unity that transcended language and biology. These memories anchored her, reminding her why she had chosen this path in the first place. By dawn, Elena had made her decision. She wouldn't abandon either side, not the humans who needed her leadership, nor the Veilith who deserved a chance at survival. Instead, she would fight harder than ever to bridge the gap between them, even if it meant sacrificing everything she held dear. As the first rays of sunlight crested the horizon, painting the battlefield in hues of gold and crimson, she squared her shoulders and marched back toward the war room. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on, armed with nothing but her conviction and the fragile threads of hope that still bound her to both worlds. Elena's return to the war room was met with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. The commanders, haggard from sleepless nights and endless strategizing, looked up as she entered, their expressions ranging from guarded curiosity to outright hostility. She didn't wait for an invitation to speak. Standing at the head of the table, her voice rang out clear and resolute, cutting through the low murmur of discontent. "I'm not asking for your trust," she began, her gaze sweeping over the room. "I'm telling you what needs to happen if we want any chance of survival, not just for us, but for both species." Her words hung heavy in the air, silencing even the most vocal dissenters. For a moment, all that could be heard was the faint hum of the holographic display flickering above the table. She laid out her plan, a ceasefire proposal to present directly to Sovereign Weaver, one that would include mutual withdrawal from contested territories, shared access to resources, and joint efforts to rebuild the planet's damaged ecosystems. It was ambitious, perhaps even naive, but Elena knew it was the only path forward. To her relief, some of the commanders nodded thoughtfully, while others exchanged wary glances. Lieutenant Marcus Hale stood quietly in the corner, his earlier admonishment replaced by cautious support. The real challenge came when Elena requested volunteers to accompany her back to the hive. Trust had eroded on both sides, and walking unarmed into alien territory felt like stepping off a cliff. Yet, to her astonishment, several soldiers stepped forward, some out of loyalty to her, others driven by desperation to end the war. Among them was Marcus, who gave her a curt nod before joining the group. His presence bolstered her resolve. If he believed in her enough to risk his life alongside her, then maybe there was still hope. When they arrived at the hive, the atmosphere was tense. Valith drones patrolled the perimeter, their movements sharp and deliberate. Sovereign Weaver awaited them in the central chamber, her spines rigid with restrained emotion. The attack on the hive's outskirts had left its mark. Damaged structures and injured drones were visible evidence of humanity's aggression. As Elena approached, the Queen's multifaceted eyes locked onto hers, searching for answers. "We didn't sanction this," Elena said firmly, her voice steady despite the weight of guilt pressing down on her chest. "But I'm here to make it right." Sovereign Weaver's response came not in words but in action. With a graceful motion, she extended an appendage toward the human delegation, inviting them closer. Around them, the glowing filaments of the hive dimmed slightly, casting the chamber in a softer light. It was a gesture of restraint, of willingness to listen, a small but significant olive branch. For hours, the two groups communicated through gestures, symbols, and the melodic hums unique to the Valith. Progress was slow and fraught with misunderstandings, but each breakthrough brought a flicker of hope. Elena translated tirelessly, her voice strained yet unwavering as she conveyed humanity's fears and desires to the Queen. In turn, Sovereign Weaver shared the Valith perspective, their struggle for survival, their reverence for the planet they now called home, and their longing for peace. As negotiations dragged on, tensions flared again. Some human soldiers grew restless, questioning whether the Valith could truly be trusted. Meanwhile, certain Valith attendants bristled at the perceived audacity of humans encroaching further into their sacred space. At one point, a heated exchange nearly escalated into violence, forcing Elena to intercede. She placed herself between the two groups, arms outstretched, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. "This isn't about blame," she shouted, her voice cracking under the strain. "It's about finding a way to live together, or die apart." Her plea seemed to resonate. Slowly, the anger subsided, replaced by a fragile truce. Sovereign Weaver emitted a low, soothing hum, which seemed to calm the agitated Valith. On the human side, Marcus stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Elena's shoulder. Together, they managed to steer the conversation back toward compromise. By the time the sun set outside the hive, a tentative agreement had been reached. Both sides agreed to a temporary ceasefire, during which joint teams would assess resource distribution and begin repairing critical infrastructure. While far from perfect, the deal represented a monumental step toward coexistence. As the humans prepared to leave the hive, Sovereign Weaver approached Elena one last time. The queen's spines relaxed, and her hum took on a tone Elena recognized as gratitude. Reaching out, Sovereign Weaver touched Elena's cheek lightly with the tip of an appendage. The sensation was warm, almost electric, sending a shiver down her spine. Then, without warning, the queen leaned closer, her multifaceted eyes locking onto Elena's with an intensity that stole her breath. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though Sovereign Weaver was offering something more than thanks, something deeper, more intimate. As the human delegation departed, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the bond she shared with the queen transcended mere diplomacy. It was a connection forged in moments of vulnerability, strengthened by acts of courage and compassion. Whatever lay ahead, she knew they had taken the first step toward a future neither species could have imagined alone. Back at the encampment, the mood was cautiously optimistic. News of the ceasefire spread quickly, sparking debates among the troops. Some celebrated the possibility of peace, while others remained skeptical, convinced the Valeth would betray them given the chance. Elena addressed the camp personally, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "This isn't the end," she declared, standing atop a makeshift platform. "It's the beginning. We've shown them we're capable of mercy, and they've shown us they're capable of trust. Now it's up to us to prove we can build something better, together." Her words ignited a spark of hope, though she knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. That night, as she gazed up at the twin suns fading beyond the horizon, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The weight of leadership still pressed heavily on her shoulders, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond duty or survival. In the weeks that followed, the ceasefire held, albeit tenuously. Joint teams worked side by side, navigating cultural differences and occasional flare-ups of tension. Elena divided her time between overseeing operations and visiting the hive, where she continued to strengthen ties with Sovereign Weaver. Their relationship deepened, evolving into something neither fully understood but both cherished. The queen often invited Elena to participate in rituals that felt increasingly personal, imbuing their interactions with a quiet intimacy that defied explanation. One evening, as they stood together beneath the pulsating glow of the hive's core, Sovereign Weaver hummed a melody unlike any Elena had heard before. It was soft, lilting, and filled with emotions too complex to name. When the sound faded, the queen extended an appendage, brushing it gently against Elena's hand. In that moment, Elena realized the truth. This wasn't just about forging peace between species, it was about bridging the vast expanse of loneliness that separated them all. And so, amidst the ruins of war and the fragile promise of renewal, Elena found herself irrevocably changed. She had walked into the unknown, faced unimaginable challenges, and emerged not as a soldier or a diplomat, but as something greater, a beacon of hope in a fractured world. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She would face it not alone, but alongside those who dared to dream of a better tomorrow. As the days turned into months, the ceasefire blossomed into an uneasy but enduring peace. Humans and Valeth worked together to heal the scarred planet, their shared labor planting seeds of trust where hatred once festered. Elena became a symbol of unity, her name spoken with reverence by both species. Yet, the bond between her and Sovereign Weaver remained unique, a quiet understanding that transcended words or rituals. One evening, beneath the twin suns' golden glow, the queen hummed a final melody, one that resonated deep within Elena's soul. It carried gratitude, love, and a promise. They had changed each other forever. When Elena returned to the human camp that night, she felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. The war was over, not with destruction, but with connection. As she gazed at the stars, she whispered a silent vow, to honor the lives lost and to protect the fragile harmony they had built. In the end, it wasn't victory or defeat that defined them, but the courage to choose compassion over fear. And in that choice, humanity and the Valeth found their shared destiny.